This is DW News, live from Berlin. The UN Security Council approves a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The United States decides for the first time not to veto the proposal, and everyone else votes in favor. Also on the program, Russia's President Vladimir Putin blames radical Islamists for the mass killings at a Moscow concert hall, but repeats his claim that Ukraine may also be involved. I'm Raheela Mahomed. It's good to have you with us. The UN Security Council has for the first time passed a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The breakthrough came as the United States decided not to block the measure, having vetoed 3 previous efforts. The resolution also demands the immediate release of all hostages still held by Hamas, the group behind the October 7th terror attacks against Israel.
The draft resolution has been adopted as resolution.
Applause hailed a milestone moment at the United Nations Security Council. 14 nations voted in favour of the resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza for the first time. The United States refrained from vetoing the agreement, instead abstaining, directly opposing a request from Israel not to do so.
This resolution rightly acknowledges that during the month of Ramadan, we must recommit to peace. Hamas can do that by accepting the deal on the table. A ceasefire can begin immediately with the release of the first hostage. And so we must put pressure on Hamas to do just that.
Israel's planned invasion of Rafah is causing major concerns for the US, its biggest ally. An Israeli delegation was due to travel to Washington this week to discuss alternatives. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called off the trip after the Security Council's decision. And Israel's Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, already in the US, shows no signs of acknowledging the ceasefire call.
We have no moral right to stop the war in Gaza until we return all the hostages home. If we do not reach a clear and decisive decision in Gaza, it may bring us closer to war in the north.
In Gaza, the Security Council vote brought some hope to many.
This marks a crucial step towards halting Israel's actions. The U.S. must leverage all of its resources as it's both the primary and ultimate advocate for Israel.
While the ceasefire vote brought hope in Gaza, without Israel's support it may end up being a symbolic gesture rather than a practical solution for peace.
Well, I asked DW Stefan Simons in Washington, D.C. whether the UN resolution is binding on Israel.
Well, it is a UN Security Council resolution, and it's the first one out of 5 attempts. This is the one who actually sticks now. Remember, there were 3 other resolutions which the US vetoed, and then there was last Friday's US resolution, US draft for a resolution, which China and Russia vetoed. And now we have one which actually sticks. It's adopted, so let's see how this will all end up panning out for Israel, for the war in Israel and Gaza. But you see, it was only possible to be that way with the US abstaining today from the vote in the Security Council. Why? Because, well, the US had still problems with the text of the resolution, but had worked all weekend long with the other partners on crafting and tweaking this language used there. And without a condemnation of Hamas for their attacks on Israel from October 7th, the US still was okay with the fundamentals, and that's why they abstained, and now we have this resolution.
So what impact is this going to have on US and Israeli relations going forward?
Well, it's a little bit of a diplomatic roller coaster and probably hasn't been the best day of Israel-U.S. relationships. What do I mean by this? The Israelis are clearly not happy with the U.S. letting this resolution actually happen, letting this pass, abstaining from the vote, not vetoing the UN resolution. However, the Israeli defense minister was here in Washington, D.C. all day long and had conversations with Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu obviously canceled the delegation, the planned visit of the delegation here in the United States. That was aimed to discuss ceasefires and a ceasefire solution for Gaza and avert a Israeli incursion or operation in Rafah. The U.S. is still very interested in that. This is not happening, an incursion into Rafah, an operation by Israelis. The Israelis say they will do it anyway. So the Biden White House and Premier Netanyahu have their work cut out for themselves and for each other because things are not very good as they stand right now.
So what does this mean in terms of trying to ensure that Israel sticks to this resolution? What will the United States have to do to ensure that there is some form of cooperation with the resolution?
Diplomatic pressure, and more diplomatic pressure. And there is not only a carrot, but also a stick, of course. And that is, as President Biden has said very clearly, very upfront, straight up, that every option is on the table regarding preventing Israel from doing this operation in Rafah by curtailing, limiting U.S. support. You remember, U.S. support was relentless and straightforward, and from the second it happened on October 7th, U.S. President Biden was in Israel in a time, it's the first time in history that a U.S. president visited Israel in a time of war, which Israel was in at the time already. So, you see, what can America do? It can halt, cut support for Israel in terms of ammunition, in terms of helicopters, in terms of parts for fighter jets, weaponry of all kind. What the U.S. will not do, I can guarantee that, is curb any support for the Iron Dome air defense system for Israel. This air defense system uses American rockets, missiles to defend Israel, and this will not be stopped. But anything else, the president said, is on the table.
That's DW's Stefan Simons in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Stefan. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said for the first time that radical Islamists carried out the attack on a concert hall near Moscow. Putin previously blamed Ukraine for the assault, which killed 139 people. ISIS-K, part of the so-called Islamic State, says it was behind the attack. And some of those allegedly involved in the killings have been charged with terrorism.
One after another, the suspects are dragged into a court in the Russian capital. Investigators say all of them have confessed to carrying out Friday's attack inside a Moscow concert hall. Videos have emerged on social media suggesting some of the group were tortured while in custody. One of them brought in directly from hospital in a wheelchair. All four suspects are now facing terrorism charges and a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. President Vladimir Putin has now said that radical Islamists carried out the attack, but he implied other forces were at work.
The bloody attack was committed by Islamists from the Islamic State organization, which is banned in Russia. We know who committed this crime against Russia and its people. We want to know who ordered it.
Outside the Crocus City Hall where the attack unfolded, people continue to lay flowers. On Sunday, Russia held a nationwide day of mourning for the dozens of victims.
People came to a concert. Some people came to relax with their families. And any one of us could have been in that situation. I want to express my condolences to all the families that were affected here. And I want to pay tribute to these people.
Among those here to mourn are survivors of the concert massacre. Some of the 5,000 people evacuated from the venue during the attack, many of them with the help of the venue's workers.
I am so grateful to all of those people who were there that evening. They showed us where to go, directed us. I would like to thank each of them. They did a great job.
It seems like a small consolation in the wake of one of the deadliest attacks on Russian soil in decades.
Now, while Vladimir Putin acknowledged the attack was carried out by Islamist militants, he still says Ukraine may have also played a role. DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert explains.
You can say it because your name is Vladimir Putin, and you're in total control of everything in Russia. The so-called courts, the so-called police, the so-called State Duma, everything is under your control. Truth doesn't matter. What matters is the propaganda line that you want to spin to mostly the Russians, but also to to those friendly people that believe that Putin is fighting NATO or whatever they believe in quite a few other countries. And I think that this is the essence of it. Look, in normal democracy, the authorities would have been under scrutiny by parliament, by independent media, by the NGOs, regarding the failures, evident failures of the security services to prevent this atrocity, while the United States, France, and other Western nations seemingly reported, or rather warned the Kremlin, they say they did, about the possibility of such an act. But in Russia, no one is responsible to anyone. Vladimir Putin is in total control. So he has to basically spin this line because there are questions already being asked on independent Russian media and on Russian social media, those that are accessible actually also, at least in a fragmented way, in Russia itself. Why did it happen? So now he has to give an explanation. You know what? We couldn't do anything about it because it's not some kind of bunch of Islamists that is doing it. It is the United States, essentially, and its Ukrainian allies that are behind it. That makes it sound much more ominous. And that, I'm sure, will lead to repercussions domestically where a renewed hunt for quote-unquote enemies of the people will resume.
And here's a reminder of our top story this hour. The UN Security Council has approved a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The US abstained, having vetoed previous resolutions. The measure was passed with 14 votes in favour. This is DW News live from Berlin. A reminder, you can find much more news, analysis and video on our website, that is dw.com. I'm Raheela Mahomed. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.